Chapter 1. Whispers of a Sunlit Dream. The first thing Emilia noticed was the warmth of the sun on her skin. It seeped through her, golden and drowsy, like the feeling of slipping into a dream that she never wanted to wake from. The soft rustling of wind through wildflowers and the distant crash of waves against the shore filled the air with a melody both unfamiliar and strangely comforting. She opened her eyes to an expanse of blue sky, so vast and endless that it stole her breath. The scent of salt water and blooming jasmine mingled in the breeze, wrapping around her like a lover's embrace. A gentle hum of life buzzed in the distance, the faint laughter of strangers, the occasional call of a seagull soaring overhead, but it was the stillness that captivated her most. It was as though time had slowed, each moment stretched and softened, just for her. Rising to her elbows, Emilia found herself on a sun-drenched hillside overlooking the ocean. The grass beneath her was soft, a patchwork of golden wheat and tiny violet flowers swaying in the lazy afternoon wind. She didn't remember how she had gotten here, but the thought barely lingered before fading into the tranquility of the moment. This place, wherever it was, felt familiar, like an echo of a dream she had forgotten until now. And then she saw him. A lone figure stood at the edge of the cliff, the sunlight catching in his tousled chestnut hair, turning it gold at the edges. His stance was relaxed, his hands buried in the pockets of his linen trousers, as though he belonged to the wind and the sea as much as the cliffs themselves. He was watching the horizon, the distant line where sky kissed water, lost in thought. The sight of him sent a ripple through her, a strange and aching familiarity she couldn't place. As though sensing her gaze, he turned. And the moment their eyes met, the world shifted. His eyes were the color of a summer storm, deep, endless, and brimming with something that made Emilia's heart stutter. He smiled then, slow and knowing, as if he had been waiting for her all along. "You're finally here," he said, his voice carrying across the wind, warm and lilting with amusement. Emilia blinked, her lips parting, but no words came. A strange sense of déjà vu washed over her, as if she had lived this moment before, in another lifetime, another dream. "Do I know you?" she asked, her own voice barely above a whisper. The boy chuckled, stepping closer. "Not yet," he said, "but you will." Something in the way he said it sent shivers down her spine. The certainty, the promise. She should have felt uneasy. She should have questioned everything. The suddenness of it all, the way he spoke as if their story had already begun long before this moment. But she didn't. Instead, she found herself mesmerized by the way he carried himself, by the way the sunlight framed his face, by the way the world seemed to hold its breath around him. "Come with me," he said, offering his hand. "There's something I want to show you." Her fingers hesitated just above his palm, but she felt the pull of something beyond logic, beyond reason, a force both terrifying and intoxicating. And so, Emilia placed her hand in his, unaware that this single touch would set her heart on a path of love and loss, of dreams and ghosts, of a summer she would never forget, a summer that had never truly existed. Chapter 2. The Boy by the Sea. The wind carried the scent of salt and sun-warmed sand as Emilia followed Liam down the narrow path winding toward the shoreline. The cliffs stretched high above them, their rugged edges softened by the golden light of late afternoon. Below, the waves rolled in a rhythmic lull, retreating and returning like a heartbeat against the earth. Liam walked with an easy confidence, his bare feet navigating the rocky descent without hesitation. Emilia, on the other hand, was more careful, hesitant with every step, feeling as though she were treading between two worlds, one she knew and one that was unraveling before her eyes. The warmth of his hand lingered against her palm, even though he had let go moments ago. At last, they reached the shore. The sand was cool beneath her feet, speckled with smooth stones and broken shells. Emilia glanced toward Liam, who stood at the water's edge, staring out at the horizon as if searching for something only he could see. "What is this place?" she asked, hugging her arms around herself. Liam smiled, but there was something wistful about it. "A place between moments," he said. "A place that only exists when it's remembered." His words sent a shiver down her spine. She wanted to press him for more, to ask what he meant, but something in his gaze made her pause. Instead, she turned her attention to the sea, its vastness stretching beyond sight, the sun dipping lower, turning the sky into a canvas of gold and rose. "You feel it, don't you?" Liam asked, his voice barely above the whisper of the tide. She hesitated. "Feel what?" "That you've been here before." He turned to her, watching her with those deep, storm-colored eyes. "That this isn't the first time." Emilia's breath caught in her throat, the strange familiarity of it all, the path through the cliffs, the scent of salt and jasmine, the way the waves seemed to sing a song just for her, had been lingering at the edges of her mind, an unspoken truth she hadn't dared acknowledge. She exhaled slowly. "It feels like a memory I lost a long time ago." Liam nodded as if he understood. Memories have a way of finding their way back. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air was thick with something unspoken, something delicate and fragile. Then Liam bent down, plucking a smooth stone from the sand, weighing it in his palm. Without warning, he flicked his wrist, sending it skipping across the water. 1, 2, 3, 4 times before it vanished beneath the surface. "Your turn," he said, handing her another stone. She hesitated, then took it. She tried to mimic his motion, but the stone plunged into the waves with a dull plop. Liam laughed. "Not bad for a first try." She rolled her eyes, but she smiled. It was easy to smile around him. They stayed there for a while, talking, laughing, letting the weight of reality slip away like the tide. The sun continued its slow descent, casting them in shades of amber and gold. As the sky darkened, Liam turned to her once more. "Stay a little longer," he said, his voice quieter now, almost hesitant. "There's more I want to show you." Emilia looked at him, at the sincerity in his eyes, and for the first time in a long time, she felt something stir deep within her. Something like hope, something like longing. And so, she stayed, unaware that with every moment spent in this place, the line between dream and reality was beginning to blur. Chapter 3. Stolen Kisses and Saltwater Promises. The evening air was thick with the scent of salt and the lingering warmth of the sun, though the horizon had begun its descent into twilight. The sky above the sea was painted in shades of deep indigo and fiery orange, a breathtaking contrast of light and shadow. Emilia stood at the water's edge, her bare feet sinking into the damp sand, feeling the earth shift beneath her with each retreating wave. Liam was beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin, but he didn't touch her. Not yet. He simply watched her, a quiet patience in his gaze, as if waiting for her to break the silence. "Do you believe in fate?" Emilia asked, her voice barely louder than the whisper of the wind. Liam tilted his head slightly, as though considering her words. "I believe in moments," he said at last, "and that sometimes the right ones find us when we least expect them." Emilia exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. There was something so effortless about him, something intoxicating in the way he strung words together like poetry meant only for her ears. It made her feel seen in a way she hadn't before, as if all the lonely years she had spent buried in books and unspoken thoughts had led her here, to him. "And this?" she asked, gesturing at the world around them. The endless ocean, the sliver of moon now hanging low in the sky, the way everything seemed to exist solely for them in that moment. Is this the right moment? Liam smiled then, slow and knowing. It is if you want it to be. Before she could overthink, before she could let the doubts creep in and steal this fragile, perfect thing from her, Emilia turned to face him fully. The glow of twilight softened his features, but his eyes, stormy and infinite, held her captive. She reached out first, fingers grazing against his, hesitant and trembling. He did not pull away. Instead, his fingers curled around hers, warm and solid, grounding her in ways she hadn't realized she needed. I don't know why it feels like I've known you forever, she admitted, her words barely more than a whisper. Liam took a step closer, the space between them vanishing until she could feel his breath ghosting over her lips. Maybe because some things are meant to exist beyond time. And then he kissed her. It wasn't urgent or hurried, but soft and deliberate, like the turning of a page in an ancient story neither of them had realized they were a part of. Emilia melted into him, her hands slipping up to tangle in his hair, her heart pounding so fiercely she wondered if he could feel it through her skin. The ocean roared in approval, waves crashing against the shore as though celebrating their stolen moment. The world around them blurred and faded until there was nothing but the warmth of his lips, the taste of salt on her tongue, and the silent promise lingering between them. One neither of them dared to speak aloud yet. When they finally broke apart, Liam rested his forehead against hers, a breathless chuckle escaping his lips. Now it's the right moment. Emilia closed her eyes, savoring the feel of him, the certainty in his words. And for the first time in a long, long while, she allowed herself to believe in something beyond dreams. Something real. Chapter 4. A love that tastes like forever. The world had changed since the moment Liam had kissed her. Or maybe, Emilia thought, she had changed. The shoreline was the same. The waves still hummed their ceaseless lullaby, and the scent of salt still clung to the air. Yet everything felt different, sharper, more vivid, as if her heart had awakened to something it had never known before. Liam led her away from the beach, his fingers loosely intertwined with hers. He walked as though he knew exactly where he was going, though the path was wild and winding, overgrown with twisting vines and wildflowers that glowed faintly in the moonlight. Emilia followed without question. There was something about him, something unspoken, that made her trust him implicitly. "Where are we going?" she asked at last, her voice barely above a whisper. Liam glanced back at her, a half-smile playing at his lips. "Somewhere special. A place only we know." Her curiosity piqued. She squeezed his hand a little tighter and let him lead her deeper into the night. The trees stretched taller here, their branches weaving into a canopy that filtered the moonlight into scattered silver fragments. Fireflies danced in lazy spirals, their soft glow illuminating their path like stars fallen to earth. After what felt like forever, they emerged into a clearing. Emilia gasped. Before them lay a small, glistening lake, its surface so still it looked like glass. The moon's reflection stretched across the water, casting everything in an ethereal glow. Wildflowers swayed at the water's edge, their petals shimmering like tiny lanterns. A single wooden dock stretched out over the lake, old but sturdy, as if it had been waiting for them all along. "It's beautiful," she breathed. Liam pulled her toward the dock, and they sat at the edge, their legs dangling above the water. The night air was cool against her skin, but she didn't mind. Not with Liam beside her, not with the quiet hum of the night wrapping around them like a whispered secret. "I used to come here all the time," Liam murmured, staring out at the lake. "Whenever I needed to think. Whenever the world felt too loud." Emilia turned to him, watching the way his expression softened in the moonlight. "And now?" He smiled, a small, wistful thing. "Now, I think I'd rather share it." A warmth bloomed in her chest, something tender and fragile. She turned her gaze back to the lake, watching as the fireflies continued their silent waltz above the water. "Tell me something about yourself," Liam said suddenly. "Something no one else knows." Emilia hesitated. It wasn't that she had secrets. Rather, she had always been the kind of person who felt more comfortable listening than speaking. But tonight, in this place that felt like a dream made real, she found herself wanting to share something, to let Liam see beyond the quiet girl she had always been. "When I was little, I used to believe that stories could come to life," she admitted. "That if I read them enough times, if I believed in them enough, the characters would step right out of the pages." Liam turned to her, his gaze thoughtful. "Maybe they can. Maybe some stories are waiting for the right person to bring them to life." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time, she wondered if she had stepped into one of those stories herself. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. The night stretched on, filled with laughter, stolen glances, and hushed confessions. And as the stars wheeled overhead, Emilia knew that this moment, this night, would be etched into her forever. A place only they knew. Chapter 5. Echoes of a Fading Sunset. The sky stretched endlessly above them, a vast ocean of midnight blue speckled with silver stars. Emilia lay back on the dock, her head resting on her arms, listening to the rhythmic lapping of the lake against the wooden planks. Liam was beside her, silent, staring at the same sky, as if searching for something hidden among the constellations. She let out a contented sigh, feeling the cool night air kiss her skin. "I don't want this night to end." Liam turned his head toward her, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Then let's make it last as long as we can." Emilia closed her eyes for a moment, letting the weight of his words settle deep within her. She wished she could press pause, capture this fleeting moment, and tuck it away where time couldn't touch it. But life never worked that way. "Do you ever wonder what it would be like if we had met somewhere else?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Somewhere far from here, in a different time, a different life?" Liam propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her with an unreadable expression. Would it change anything? She hesitated before shaking her head. "No, I think we would always find our way to each other." His fingers brushed against hers, the touch so light it was almost a ghost of a caress. "I think so too." Silence stretched between them, comfortable and full of unspoken things. Emilia let herself imagine 1,000 different versions of them, dancing in candlelit ballrooms, running through sun-drenched fields, laughing in the glow of city lights. No matter the world, she could see him there, waiting for her. A cool breeze rustled the trees, and she shivered slightly. Without a word, Liam shrugged off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. She looked at him, surprised, but he only smiled. "Can't have you freezing before the night is over." She hugged the jacket closer, inhaling the faint scent of him. Sea salt, something warm and familiar. "Thank you." Liam settled back beside her, his fingers trailing absent-mindedly over the dock's wooden surface. "Tell me a story, Emilia. Something just for me." She hesitated. She had always been better at losing herself in other people's stories than telling her own. But as she looked at him, at the quiet way he waited, she found herself wanting to share something real. "Once upon a time," she began, a small smile forming on her lips, "there was a girl who believed in ghosts. Not the kind that haunted houses, but the kind that lingered in the corners of forgotten summers, in the echoes of laughter, in the spaces between heartbeats." Liam tilted his head. "And did she ever stop believing?" Emilia swallowed, feeling the weight of her own words. "Not yet." His fingers brushed against hers once more, lingering this time. "Maybe she's not supposed to." The stars above them burned brighter, and for a moment, Emilia thought that maybe, just maybe, some dreams were meant to last forever. Chapter 6. The Storm That Took Everything. The sun rose slowly over the horizon, casting golden ribbons of light across the lake. Emilia stirred awake on the dock, the scent of damp wood and the cool morning air greeting her senses. She blinked, taking in the way the mist curled above the water like whispers of dreams not yet ready to fade. Beside her, Liam lay on his back, one arm tucked behind his head, eyes half-lidded as if caught between sleep and waking. "Morning," he murmured, a lazy smile curving his lips. Emilia stretched, feeling the slight ache in her muscles from sleeping on the hard planks. But she didn't mind. She had never felt more at peace than in this moment. "Morning," she replied, her voice still tinged with sleep. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the rhythmic lapping of the waves against the dock. It was a sound she was beginning to love, a secret language spoken only to those who took the time to listen. "Do you ever wonder if the waves remember every shore they touch?" Liam mused, his voice quiet, almost as if he were speaking to the water itself. Emilia turned to look at him. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "They travel so far, again and again, yet they always return. Maybe they carry memories of the places they've been, the people who have stood by the sea, the stories whispered to them." She smiled at the thought. "I like that idea, that the ocean remembers." Liam finally sat up, running a hand through his hair. "Maybe that's why we're drawn to it. Maybe it holds something we lost a long time ago." Emilia considered his words, a gentle ache blooming in her chest. She had always felt a strange pull toward the sea, a yearning she could never quite explain. Perhaps it was the echo of something forgotten, a story waiting to be rediscovered. As the morning stretched on, they wandered along the shoreline, toes sinking into the cool sand. They spoke in murmurs, as if afraid to disturb the tranquility of the dawn. Liam found a seashell, small and spiraled, and placed it in Emilia's palm. "For you," he said simply. She traced the ridges with her fingers, feeling the weight of the gesture. "Thank you." Liam tilted his head, watching her. "You keep collecting pieces of this place. Are you planning on taking the whole summer with you when you leave?" The word struck her harder than she expected. She looked up at him, the truth lodged in her throat. "I don't want to think about leaving." His expression softened. "Then don't." "Not yet." A breeze picked up, rustling through the dune grass, stirring the scent of salt and sun-warmed sand. In that moment, Emilia wished she could stay here forever, in this world of whispered waves and stolen mornings. But summers always ended, and she wasn't sure she was ready for that inevitable truth. Chapter 7. Waking to an Empty World. The midday sun hung high above the ocean, casting long shimmering streaks over the water's surface. Emilia and Liam walked side by side along the shoreline, their footprints trailing behind them, only to be washed away by the ever-reaching tide. The wind played with her hair, tousling it as if the breeze itself wanted to be a part of their story. Liam picked up a smooth, round stone and skipped it across the water. "That was 5, he said, grinning as the last ripple disappeared. "Think you can beat that?" Emilia smirked, accepting his silent challenge. She selected a flat rock, held her breath, and flicked her wrist just like he had shown her. The stone bounced twice before sinking beneath the waves. She groaned. 2. Not bad, right? Liam chuckled. "Not bad at all. But you're still a long way from catching up to me." Emilia nudged him playfully. "Give me time. I'll get there." Their laughter faded as they continued their slow journey down the shore. The scent of salt and sun-warmed sand filled the air, mingling with the distant calls of seagulls soaring above. Emilia wanted to hold on to this moment, to keep it locked away where time couldn't touch it. Do you ever feel like the ocean is trying to tell us something? She mused, watching the waves roll in and retreat, as if whispering secrets only the wind could decipher. Liam's gaze was distant, thoughtful. Maybe it is. Maybe it carries messages from all the people who've ever stood here, wondering the same thing. She liked that idea, that they weren't alone in their longing, that others had once stood in the same spot, their hearts aching for something just out of reach. As they walked farther, they came upon a cluster of rocks jutting out into the sea. Liam reached out his hand, a silent invitation. Without hesitation, she took it, letting him guide her carefully over the uneven terrain. When they reached the highest point, they sat together, legs dangling over the edge, staring out at the endless blue horizon. You know, Liam said after a while, sometimes I wonder what life would be like if we weren't bound by time. If we could just stay here, like this, forever. Emilia swallowed against the lump in her throat. Would you want that? To never leave? He turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. I think I'd want to stay as long as you're here. Her breath caught, the meaning behind his words sinking deep into her bones. The warmth of his hand was still wrapped around hers, grounding her in the present, in this fleeting moment where the world felt smaller, simpler. The waves crashed against the rocks below, their rhythm steady, unchanging. But Emilia knew better. The tides always shifted, and nothing, not even summer, could last forever. Chapter 8. Phantom Heartbeats in the Dark. Emilia woke to the sound of her alarm clock blaring, the shrill noise slicing through the calm of the morning. She groaned, her hand fumbling in the dark to silence it, still tangled in the remnants of a dream. It had been the same one again. The summer, the warmth, the laughter, and Liam, always Liam. His face, his smile, his touch lingered in her mind like a song she couldn't quite place, a tune that haunted her even as she fought to shake off sleep. The dream felt more vivid this time. She could still feel the warmth of his hand holding hers, the way their fingers fit together so naturally, as if they had been made for each other. The scent of salt water and sunshine had filled her senses, a smell that clung to her even after she had woken. It was like she had never left that perfect summer moment, even though the reality was so much colder, so much more distant. Sitting up in her bed, Emilia hugged her knees to her chest, staring out the window. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft glow across the sky, the promise of a new day hanging in the air. She could hear the faint hum of the world outside, but everything seemed muted, as if she were trapped in a dream. And maybe, she thought, she was. She rubbed her temples, trying to rid herself of the feeling that had settled in her chest. The dream of Liam always felt so real, so palpable, like she could reach out and touch him if she just believed enough. But each time she woke, she was faced with the harsh truth that he wasn't real. He never was. And yet, there were mornings like this, where it felt like he was still with her. The air smelled like the sea, even though she was far from the coast. The faintest tune played in her mind, soft and lingering, like a song that was always there, waiting for her to listen. Emilia stood up, pulling on a sweater and wrapping herself in the comforting warmth of it. She felt the pull of the day, the weight of responsibilities pressing against her chest, but she couldn't shake the need to find something, to understand what it was about these dreams that held her captive. Why did it feel like she was losing herself to a world that didn't exist? She wandered downstairs, her mind still lost in thoughts of Liam and the summer they had shared in that dream. It wasn't fair, she thought. She didn't deserve to feel this empty. But the longer she held on to that dream, the more it seemed to drain her of everything that was real. The kitchen was quiet, the soft sound of the coffee maker the only noise as Emilia poured herself a cup. She stood by the window, sipping slowly, watching the world outside. Her phone buzzed on the counter, pulling her from her reverie. She glanced at the screen. It was a message from her best friend, Chloe. "How's the day going so far? You up for some coffee later?" Emilia smiled faintly, typing a quick response. "Just woke up. Not much happening. Let's grab coffee. I could use a distraction." She hit send and set the phone down, returning to her thoughts. Even now, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the verge of something. Something important that would bring her closer to understanding the truth of her dreams, to understanding why Liam still felt so real to her. Later that afternoon, Emilia met Chloe at their usual cafe. The small, cozy shop smelled of freshly baked pastries and rich coffee, the clinking of cups and the murmur of conversations providing a soothing background to the busy pace of the world outside. As Emilia sat down across from Chloe, the familiar scent of her coffee filled her senses, but her mind wandered, drifting back to the dream. "So, what's been going on with you?" Chloe asked, leaning in. "You've seemed a little off lately. Anything on your mind?" Emilia hesitated, the weight of the dream pressing down on her chest. She had tried to explain it to Chloe before, but every time she did, it felt like the words didn't capture the depth of what she was feeling. How could she explain something that was so intangible, something that only existed in the quiet corners of her mind? "I don't know," Emilia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've just been dreaming a lot. About someone. A person who feels real, but isn't. It's hard to explain." Chloe's eyes softened with understanding. "You mean like a crush?" Emilia shook her head. "No, it's not like that. It's different. It's like he's there, but not. Like I know him, but I don't." Chloe frowned, taking a sip of her coffee. "That sounds pretty complicated. Maybe it's your mind trying to work through something. Or maybe you're just longing for something real, you know?" Emilia stared at her cup, the words swirling around in her head. Longing. That was exactly it. She longed for something real, something she couldn't quite reach, something that slipped through her fingers every time she tried to grasp it. The bell above the cafe door jingled, and Emilia's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know why, but the sudden sound made her pause, her eyes shifting toward the door. And then, as if by some cruel twist of fate, the song she had been hearing in her dreams filled the cafe, faint but unmistakable. It was the same melody, the one that had been haunting her for weeks now. The soft, melancholic tune played over the speakers, the notes wrapping around her heart like a delicate thread, pulling her deeper into the dream. It felt like Liam was there, standing just beyond the edge of her vision, waiting for her. Her breath caught in her throat, and she turned to Chloe, her voice trembling. "Do you hear that? The song?" Chloe looked at her, confused. "The song? It's just background music, Emilia. Don't tell me it's bothering you again." But it wasn't just background music. It never was. Emilia's mind raced. Could it be possible that the song was more than just a coincidence? That it was somehow tied to Liam, to that dream she couldn't escape? Her pulse quickened, and she felt a tightness in her chest, the yearning for something she couldn't name washing over her once more. It was then that she realized something she hadn't wanted to admit. The dream was never going to leave her. It had become a part of her, woven into her very being like a thread in the fabric of her soul. No matter how hard she tried to shake it, no matter how many distractions she sought, Liam, his memory, his presence, would always haunt her. And maybe, just maybe, that was all she would ever have. A ghost of a summer long past, lingering in her heart, never to be touched but always to be felt. The song played on, its soft, haunting notes filling the space between her and reality, pulling her deeper into the longing she couldn't escape. It was a reminder, a sign that some things, some loves, were meant to be lost, fading into the quiet spaces of the heart, but never truly gone. As she sat there, staring into her coffee, She couldn't help but wonder if the ghost of Liam's love would always be with her, a bittersweet reminder of the summer that never was. Chapter 9. Chasing Shadows of What Never Was. The days blurred together, each one stretching longer than the last, as Emilia floated through the motions of her life. She attended her classes, met with Chloe for coffee, and spent evenings in the dim light of her bedroom, reading novels that were far less captivating than the one playing in her dreams. And yet, the dream wasn't a dream anymore. It was a part of her existence, a persistent shadow that lingered at the edges of her waking world, always just within reach. Each morning, she woke to the same sense of loss. The dream would end, and she would find herself in the quiet of her own room, the air heavy with the remnants of a world that wasn't real. But there was something more now, something that made the waking world feel impossibly distant, like it belonged to someone else. The song, still present in her mind, played in the background of her thoughts, a haunting lullaby that she couldn't shake. It echoed softly in the spaces where Liam had once been, and the emptiness that followed was suffocating. Sometimes, she would find herself humming the tune without realizing it, the melody slipping out like a secret she couldn't hold on to. And always, she would feel the pull of the dream, the warmth of his hand, the sound of his laughter, the way he looked at her like she was the only thing that mattered. But that was the cruelest part of it. The dream had been everything, and yet it was nothing. She had felt everything in those moments: love, joy, connection, and then she woke up, only to realize that it was all a fabrication, a beautiful, painful illusion. Emilia sat at her desk, the pages of her textbook spread out before her, but she couldn't focus. She tried to read, tried to immerse herself in the present, but the words blurred together, and all she could think about was the past, the summer that had never been, the love that had never existed. She closed the book with a frustrated sigh, running her fingers through her hair. The scent of the ocean, so vivid in the dream, still lingered in her mind, a constant reminder of what she couldn't have. The sound of waves crashing against the shore, the warmth of the sun on her skin. It all felt like a memory of something she had lost before it had even begun. "Emilia, you've got to snap out of this," she muttered to herself, trying to break the spell. "This isn't real. He's not real." But the words sounded hollow, even to her own ears. She didn't know how to let go of something that felt so tangible, so real. The love she had felt for Liam was different from anything she had ever known. It was a love that existed only in the space between dreams and reality, a love that she couldn't explain, but couldn't forget. The evening came, and with it, a sense of quiet that wrapped around the world. Emilia stood by her window, staring out at the dimming sky. The city was alive with the hum of activity, the pulse of people rushing to and from their lives. But in that moment, she felt disconnected from it all. It was as if she were standing outside of herself, watching the world move while she remained still, caught in a web of memories that were not her own. Her phone buzzed, breaking the silence, and she picked it up to find a message from Chloe. "Are you okay? You've been kind of distant lately." Emilia stared at the screen for a moment, the weight of her own thoughts pressing down on her. She didn't want to admit it, didn't want to confess that she had been drowning in a sea of dreams and longing. But the truth was there, plain as day. She typed a response, her fingers hesitating over the keys. "I'm fine, just thinking a lot about things that don't make sense." She hit send and set the phone down, returning her gaze to the fading light outside. A part of her wanted to share everything with Chloe, the dreams, the song, the way it felt like Liam was still there, just out of reach. But she couldn't. It would sound insane. She didn't even understand it herself. And then, as if on cue, the song played again. The soft melody drifted into her mind, the same one that had followed her for weeks, the one she had heard in the cafe, in the background of her dreams. It was everywhere, a constant thread that wove itself into the fabric of her thoughts, pulling her closer to something she couldn't name. She closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. The notes seemed to pull at her heart, a reminder of a love she could never hold, a love that existed only in the quiet spaces of her mind. Suddenly, the memory of Liam's voice, his gentle, soothing voice, came to her, clear as day. "Emilia," he had whispered, his voice carrying a tenderness that had felt like a promise. "You're not alone. Even when you wake up." Emilia's breath caught in her throat. His words echoed in her mind, but they weren't just words. They were a lifeline, a tether that kept her from falling too far into the abyss. She remembered the way he had held her, the way he had made her feel like everything was going to be okay, even though she knew it was a lie. But his presence, real or imagined, had always been a comfort. And now, she realized it still was. Even now, when the dream seemed like a distant memory, she could still feel the warmth of his hand in hers, the steadiness of his gaze. It was as if he had left a part of himself with her, a piece of his soul that lingered in the quiet moments when she allowed herself to remember. Emilia let out a shaky breath, her hands trembling as she wiped away a tear she hadn't even realized had fallen. She hadn't been able to move on, hadn't been able to let go of something she couldn't explain. But now, as she stood there in the silence of her room, she realized something important. Liam may not have been real in the way the world defined reality, but he was real in the only way that mattered, in her heart. And maybe that was enough. As she stood in the fading light of the evening, Emilia made a promise to herself. She would stop searching for answers that weren't meant to be found. She would stop trying to figure out the how and the why of her dreams. Instead, she would carry the memory of Liam with her, a quiet, enduring presence that would guide her forward, even if it was only as a ghost. With that, she closed her eyes one last time, allowing the song to fill her mind completely, and for the first time in a long while, she felt at peace. Chapter 10. A Love Letter to a Ghost. Emilia woke up to an early morning sun that stretched its pale light across her room, casting soft shadows on the walls. The remnants of the dream still clung to her like a fog, thick and impenetrable. She could feel it, Liam's presence, hovering just beyond the veil of sleep. But as the fog lifted, it always slipped away, leaving only the hollow ache of knowing he wasn't real. Not truly. She sat up, the bed creaking beneath her, and rubbed her eyes. The world outside her window was quiet, as if it, too, was still recovering from the night. It was a Saturday, and though there were errands to run and responsibilities waiting, she felt no desire to face them. The weight of the dream was too heavy, its pull too strong. The quietness of the morning only made her feel more disconnected, as if the dream had woven itself so deeply into her life that the waking world no longer felt tangible. It was as though she were living in a half-life, a world where everything existed in the space between reality and the dreams she couldn't escape. She thought of Liam, his laugh, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, how he'd look at her with that intensity that made her feel like she was the only person in the world. And yet, none of it was real. She had woken from that perfect, warm summer again and again, only to find herself back in the cold, lonely reality of her own life. She stood up and made her way to the kitchen, the rhythmic sound of her footsteps the only sound in the quiet apartment. The morning routine felt automatic. Pouring a cup of coffee, staring out the window, watching the world outside rush by. But all she could think about was him, the lingering memory of what could never be. The phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her from her thoughts. She pulled it out and saw Chloe's name flashing on the screen, followed by a simple message. "Hey, want to grab some lunch today?" Emilia smiled faintly, feeling a pang of guilt for how distant she'd been lately. She typed out a quick response. Yeah, sounds good. I could use the distraction. Her thumb hovered over the screen for a moment longer before hitting send, and then, just like that, she was pulled back into the quiet of her thoughts, into the space where Liam's memory still lingered, always present, like a ghost. The hours passed slowly as Emilia moved through the motions of her day, the mundane tasks of living feeling more and more like a distraction from the yearning that never left her. She found herself thinking about the summer they had shared in the dream, how real it had all felt, the laughter, the conversations, the gentle breeze on the beach. It was as though every moment had been etched into her soul, a series of snapshots in time that she could never forget. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't recall the details. She couldn't remember what had happened at the end of the summer, what had caused her to wake up. There was a blank space in her memory, a gap that was both maddening and comforting. It was as if she had been pulled from that world before she could learn the truth, before she could understand the significance of it all. When she met Chloe for lunch, the noise of the cafe seemed to pull her further into the world around her. The chatter, the clinking of dishes, the aroma of fresh-baked bread. It was all so real, so present. And yet, even amidst the bustle, Emilia felt like she was standing on the edge of something, teetering between two worlds. Chloe, ever perceptive, looked up from her menu, her brow furrowed with concern. "You okay?" she asked, her voice gentle. Emilia nodded, though the words caught in her throat. She had been trying to keep the heaviness inside, but it was becoming impossible. "I'm fine," she said, though the lie felt bitter on her tongue. "Just thinking about things. About him." Chloe didn't push. Instead, she set her menu down and gave Emilia a knowing look. "You've been talking about him a lot. And you haven't been yourself lately. What happened, Emilia?" Emilia sighed, her fingers tracing the rim of her water glass. She couldn't keep running from it. Not anymore. She had tried to explain it once, but the words had never seemed right. But now, in the quiet of this cafe, with Chloe's eyes filled with concern, she found herself opening up. "I don't know," she said softly. "I've been dreaming about him. About a summer we spent together. And it feels so real, Chloe. Like I can still feel him with me, even when I wake up. I don't know if I'm losing my mind, or if it's just... I don't know." Chloe's expression softened, and she reached across the table, placing her hand gently over Emilia's. Listen to me. I don't know what's going on in your dreams, but I do know this. It's okay to feel lost sometimes. It's okay to miss something you never really had. But you can't keep living in that dream. You need to find a way to live for yourself, to stop letting the ghost of this person take over your life. The words stung, even as they rang with truth. Emilia looked away, out the window, where the world continued to move on without her. She had known, deep down, that Chloe was right. She couldn't keep clinging to the past, to a love that had never truly existed. But how could she let go when the dream felt like such an integral part of who she was now? How could she move forward when everything in her heart still screamed for a future that could never be? "I don't know how," she whispered, the words thick with emotion. "It feels like I'm losing something, Chloe. Like I'm losing a part of myself." Chloe squeezed her hand, her voice gentle but firm. "You're not losing yourself. You're just finding your way back to you. It's going to hurt, I know, but you can't let this dream hold you hostage. You've got to live your life, even if that means letting go of him." Emilia closed her eyes, letting the words settle deep inside her, a quiet weight she knew she would have to carry for a long time. But for the first time in weeks, she felt a spark of something other than longing, a small, flickering flame of hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of the haze, a way to find herself again. She opened her eyes and met Chloe's gaze. "I don't know where to start." Chloe gave her a warm, reassuring smile. "Start with today. Live in the present. Take it one step at a time." Emilia nodded, the weight in her chest still there, but now accompanied by a small sense of resolve. She didn't have all the answers. She didn't even know where to begin. But for the first time, she was willing to try. The rest of their lunch passed in a comfortable silence, the conversation shifting to lighter topics, but the words Chloe had spoken lingered in Emilia's mind, a quiet echo that refused to fade. Later that afternoon, as Emilia walked home, the city bustling around her, she found herself thinking about Liam again. The memories of their dream summer still felt so vivid, so real. But she also knew that she couldn't stay there forever. She couldn't live in a memory of something that had never truly existed. With each step, the weight of that realization grew lighter, and though the ache in her heart remained, it was no longer all-consuming. Maybe she wasn't losing herself after all. Maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to find the path back to who she was before the dream had started, before the ghost of forgotten summers had wrapped itself so tightly around her heart. And though the future was still uncertain, Emilia knew one thing for sure. She wasn't ready to give up on her own life just yet. Chapter 11. The Scent of Memory and Longing. Emilia's life had taken on a rhythm again, albeit a fragile one. Each day felt like a quiet step toward reclaiming herself, though the memory of Liam still lingered like an unwelcome guest, a shadow that stretched over her every thought. The ache, though softened, was far from gone. She had convinced herself that it was simply part of the process. Time would heal, she told herself. Time would help her let go of the dream. But it wasn't that simple. The world felt a little more distant now, as if she was walking through it with a veil over her eyes. The conversations with Chloe had helped, though. They were still regular, still filled with moments of laughter and a shared understanding. Chloe had always been a steady presence, a reminder of what was real, and her words about living in the present continued to echo in Emilia's mind. But even as she took Chloe's advice to heart, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, something important. It was late one afternoon when she decided to take a walk. The sky was clouded over, an early spring storm threatening to roll in. Emilia didn't mind. The cool air felt like a gentle reprieve from the weight of her thoughts. She wandered down streets she'd walked 100 times before, her feet moving on autopilot while her mind drifted elsewhere. She hadn't meant to come here, but as the hours passed, she found herself at the edge of the old park near the university. The same park where she and Liam had walked together in her dreams, laughing as they passed under the gnarled oak trees and sat by the edge of the small lake. The memory was vivid, as though the dream had seeped into this place, leaving behind its trace in the soft rustling of the leaves and the quiet murmur of the wind. The moment they had shared, the way he'd looked at her, how he'd made her feel seen. It all felt alive, even here, even now. Emilia paused by the iron gate that led into the park, her hand resting on the cool metal as she stared at the path that stretched before her. A part of her longed to step inside, to walk the familiar route, but something held her back. She was afraid of what might happen if she did. Would the memories come flooding back too strongly? Would she lose herself in the dream again, unable to return to the world she had fought so hard to rejoin? She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the scent of wet earth and damp leaves. The wind picked up, carrying with it a familiar sound, the soft melody of the song that had haunted her thoughts for so long. It played in her mind like an echo, a reminder of what had been and perhaps of what could never be. The song was not new. It was the same tune that had always seemed to follow her, trailing behind her like a secret. And just as it had done so many times before, it filled her with a sense of longing, a deep ache in her chest. She wondered if it was a memory from the dream, or if it was simply her mind refusing to let go of something that didn't belong to her. But as she stood there, caught between the pull of the past and the present, Emilia heard something else, a soft sound, like footsteps behind her. She turned quickly, her heart jumping into her throat, but when she looked, the park was empty. Just the wind, just the echo of leaves. But then, as if guided by some unseen force, her gaze was drawn toward a small bench beneath the oak tree, the same oak tree from her dreams. There, sitting on the bench, was a figure, a silhouette she recognized, though she had never seen him in the waking world. It was Liam, or at least someone who looked like him, his head tilted slightly as he looked out across the park, his expression serene. Emilia's breath caught in her throat. Her heart pounded in her chest as she took a tentative step forward, not sure if she was imagining this, or if the dream had somehow bled into the waking world. It was impossible. She knew it was impossible, but she couldn't stop herself from walking toward him, drawn in by the pull of something she couldn't explain. As she approached, the figure turned, his eyes meeting hers. And there it was again, that look, the warmth, the intensity, the way he made her feel like she was the only one in the world. It was Liam, and yet it wasn't. He was real, but he wasn't. He was both the dream and the reality, caught somewhere between. "Emilia," he said softly, his voice carrying the same gentle tone she remembered. "I knew you'd come." She froze, her heart racing in her chest, her breath coming in quick bursts. How is this possible?" she whispered, the words trembling on her lips. Liam smiled, his eyes full of a tenderness she could never fully understand. "Does it really matter?" he asked, his voice low and soothing. "I'm here, and that's all that matters." Her head spun, her mind struggling to grasp the reality of the moment. It felt too real to be a dream, and yet it was impossible to deny that she had woken up from the dream so many times before. And yet here he was, sitting before her, as if nothing had changed. "I don't know what to believe anymore," Emilia said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I don't know if you're real, or if I'm just holding on to something that doesn't exist." Liam's smile softened, and he stood slowly, moving toward her with the grace of someone who had never been bound by time or space. He reached out, his hand brushing against hers in a gesture that felt both familiar and foreign. "Does it matter?" he asked again, his eyes searching hers. "Does it matter if I'm real or not? All I know is that I've always been with you, in some way. And that's what counts." The wind rustled around them, the trees whispering secrets of a time long past. For a moment, the world seemed to fall away, leaving only the two of them standing there, suspended in a bubble of quiet understanding. Emilia's chest tightened, the ache of the dream rising again. She didn't know how to explain the way her heart swelled when she looked at him, how her soul seemed to recognize him even in this impossible moment. "Why do you keep haunting me?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. "Why can't I move on? Why can't I let you go?" Liam's expression softened, a flicker of sadness passing across his face. "Because, Emilia, you don't have to let go. You don't have to forget me. Just remember what we shared. That's all I ask." Emilia's hand trembled as she reached out to touch his. Her fingers grazed his skin, but it was as though there was nothing there. No warmth, no substance. He was fading, slipping through her fingers like sand. She closed her eyes tightly, her heart breaking as she realized that once again, he was slipping away. When she opened her eyes again, the bench was empty. The wind continued to blow, the trees continued to sway, and the park remained as it had always been. Liam was gone, but his presence lingered in the air, in the space between heartbeats, in the silent echo of his smile. And Emilia, standing alone beneath the oak tree, realized something important. Maybe it wasn't about finding the answers or about letting go of the dream. Maybe it was about living with it, carrying it forward, and finding a way to make peace with the memory of something beautiful, even if it had never been real. She closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek, and whispered into the wind, "I won't forget you, Liam." Chapter 12. When Dreams Refuse to Die. The days that followed the encounter in the park were a strange blend of clarity and confusion. Emilia had woken that morning with a strange sense of calm, as though something deep within her had shifted in the quiet moments beneath the oak tree. But the memory of Liam lingered, not as a haunting, but as a companion to her thoughts. She couldn't quite explain what had happened there, whether it had been a manifestation of her longing, a dream that had bled into the waking world, or something more ethereal, but it didn't matter. The truth was that she had felt him, and in that moment, it had been enough. Emilia had returned to the park the next morning, hoping for answers, hoping to find him again. But the bench was empty, the oak tree silent in the early morning mist. The world felt ordinary in its stillness, and yet there was a part of her that couldn't shake the sensation that something had been irrevocably altered. And so, the days passed. She kept busy with work, spent time with Chloe, and tried to convince herself that life was moving forward. But there was always that underlying ache, the memory of the summer that never truly was, and the unanswered questions that weighed heavily on her heart. One evening, as she sat alone in her apartment, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup, she realized that she had not dreamt of Liam in a few days. The silence that had descended upon her sleep felt both unsettling and peaceful. It was as if the world she had been clinging to was slowly slipping away, as though the dream had finally let her go. But in the quiet of her thoughts, there was still a part of her that yearned for it. She could almost hear the familiar melody of their song playing in the distance, like the echo of something long past. She stood up, pushing the chair back with a creak, and moved to the window, gazing out at the city below. The lights twinkled in the distance, and the streets hummed with the steady rhythm of life. She had always felt out of sync with the world, as though she were waiting for something to fall into place, some connection that would make sense of everything. But now, in this quiet moment, she wondered if it was time to stop waiting, to stop searching for something that might never come. She had spent so much of her life dreaming of a love she couldn't have, living in the shadows of a dream that had never truly existed, and maybe, just maybe, it was time to start living for herself. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts, pulling her from the haze of uncertainty. She moved toward the door, her heart skipping a beat, though she wasn't sure why. When she opened it, Chloe stood on the other side, her face alight with a smile. "Hey, you," Chloe said, pushing past her into the apartment with her usual energy. "I brought dinner. You haven't been answering my calls, and I figured we could use a night to just relax." Emilia smiled, the weight of the moment lifting just a little. "Thanks, Chloe. You didn't have to do that." "I know I didn't," Chloe said, setting the bag of takeout on the counter, "but I thought it might help. Come on, we're watching that ridiculous rom-com you love." "No excuses." Emilia laughed softly, the sound a little foreign but pleasant. For a moment, she forgot about the ache in her heart, the pull of the dream, and simply let herself be in the moment with her best friend. They settled on the couch, the familiar comfort of Chloe's presence a balm for her soul. The TV flickered to life, and for a while, they were just two friends enjoying a silly movie, the world outside fading away. But as the credits rolled and the evening wore on, Emilia found herself growing quiet again, the smile slipping from her lips. Chloe noticed immediately. She asked, her tone soft. "What's going on?" Emilia hesitated, unsure of how to put it into words. "I'm not sure anymore, Chloe. I feel like I've been caught between two worlds, and I don't know how to live in either of them." Chloe sat down next to her, her expression serious now. What do you mean? Emilia exhaled deeply, leaning back against the couch. I keep thinking about Liam, about the dream. It was real in a way, but it wasn't, and I can't seem to let go of it. It feels like part of me is still there, in that summer we shared. I keep thinking, if I could just go back to that place, to that time, maybe I'd understand. Maybe it would all make sense. Chloe was quiet for a moment, her eyes studying Emilia. Do you think that's what you need? To go back to something that isn't real? I don't know, Emilia admitted, her voice thick with emotion. I just feel like I'm missing something. Like there's a piece of me that hasn't fully woken up yet. Chloe reached out, placing a hand gently over Emilia's. You don't need to go back, Em. The past is gone, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have value. You've learned something from it, from him. But now it's time to carry that forward, not hold on to it like a weight. Emilia met her gaze, her eyes searching for the reassurance she so desperately needed. How do you move on from something that felt so real? You don't forget it, Chloe said softly, but you find a way to live with it. You take the good, the lessons, and you let it shape who you are. It's not about forgetting him, Emilia. It's about remembering yourself. Emilia blinked, her throat tight with the sudden rush of emotion. Chloe was right, as always. She wasn't asking her to forget the dream, to erase the love that had touched her heart so deeply, but to allow it to exist as a part of her past, not as a chain that bound her to a place she could never return to. She squeezed Chloe's hand, a tear slipping down her cheek. I'm scared, she whispered. I know, Chloe said gently, but you're not alone in this. You don't have to figure it all out on your own. You have me, and I'm here. We're in this together. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Emilia allowed herself to truly believe it. She didn't have to carry the weight of the dream alone. She didn't have to shoulder the burden of unspoken memories by herself. There was a way forward, even if she didn't yet know what that path would look like. The quiet ache in her heart remained, a soft reminder of the love that had once been. But now, it was no longer a chain. It was a part of her, something she could carry with grace, something she could choose to honor without letting it consume her. As Chloe made a joke about the next movie they would watch, Emilia smiled, her heart a little lighter than before. Maybe she wasn't quite ready to let go of the dream, but she was ready to let go of the fear. And in that moment, that was enough. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Emilia felt a quiet resolve in her chest. She was ready to face it. Chapter 13. The Man Who Wasn't Him. The days following her conversation with Chloe brought a surprising sense of peace. Emilia still found herself wrestling with the memories of the dream, with the elusive sensation that Liam was never truly gone, but she no longer felt as though she was drowning in them. Each day was a step forward, even if the path was not entirely clear. The city outside her window seemed to shift as well, moving with a rhythm that Emilia was starting to match. She found herself walking through the streets with a newfound awareness, as though the world was unfolding around her in ways she had never noticed before. The people, the sounds, the moments, each of them became more vivid, more real. And yet, no matter how much she immersed herself in the present, there was a part of her that still longed for the dream, for the world where everything had felt so simple and pure. But Emilia was learning, slowly, to hold both the past and the present in her hands without letting them crush her. She didn't need to let go of the love she had for Liam, nor did she need to cling to it as if it were the only thing that could define her. There was a balance to be found, a place between remembering and moving on. It was a Wednesday evening when Emilia found herself wandering the streets once again, her feet carrying her through the familiar paths of the city. Her mind was quiet, for once, not consumed by the ache of memories, but simply present in the moment. The late summer air was still warm, the sun casting long shadows across the pavement, and the buzz of evening life filled the air. She wasn't sure where she was going, but she felt drawn to the park again. It had been a while since she had been there, and though the place was tied to the dream, she had a strange sense that it was calling to her, inviting her to return. She hesitated at the edge of the gate, her heart beating a little faster as she stood there, just as she had weeks before. The park seemed unchanged, its trees still stretching toward the sky, its path still winding through the greenery. The bench beneath the oak tree was empty, as it always was when she visited now. Emilia walked inside, her steps slow and deliberate, as though she were trying to anchor herself in this world while still holding on to the memories that had shaped her. The air was thick with the scent of earth and grass, and the wind whispered through the branches above. She paused at the edge of the small lake, watching the water ripple in response to the breeze, and for a moment, the world felt suspended. It was then that she heard it, the faintest sound, a song carried on the wind, the same melody that had followed her from the dream. It was barely audible at first, like a memory just out of reach, but it grew louder, clearer, until it was as if the very air was vibrating with its presence. The song filled her, wrapping around her like a familiar embrace, and she closed her eyes, letting herself be swept away by its rhythm. But when she opened her eyes again, she saw him. Liam. He was standing a few feet away, just beyond the path, his back to her as he stared out over the lake. The sight of him made her heart lurch, a mixture of longing and disbelief filling her chest. He was real, and yet he wasn't. He was the same and different, a figure from the dream, yet somehow more tangible now, more present. Liam? Her voice cracked as she spoke, the name slipping from her lips like a breath she had been holding for far too long. He turned slowly, his expression soft, as though he had been waiting for her. His eyes, those eyes that had always held such warmth, such depth, met hers with the same quiet understanding that she remembered. "Emilia," he said, his voice gentle, like the sound of the breeze through the leaves. "I knew you'd come back." Her heart hammered in her chest as she took a step forward, her feet unsure, as if she were afraid that if she moved too quickly, he would disappear again. She could barely believe what she was seeing. Had this moment been real? Or was she once again slipping into the dream? "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice trembling. "How are you here? I thought you were gone." Liam smiled softly, his expression a mix of sadness and fondness. "I never really left, Emilia. You just stopped seeing me. But I've always been here, in the spaces between your heartbeats, in the quiet moments when you listen closely enough to the song of the world." Emilia's breath caught in her throat as she struggled to make sense of his words. "But it's impossible. You were just a dream. You were never real. Does it matter?" Liam asked gently, his voice full of the same tenderness she remembered. "Does it matter if I was a dream or if I was real? I've always been a part of you, Emilia, and even if you can't see me, I'm still here, in the corners of your heart." The weight of his words settled around her like a heavy fog. She wasn't sure what to feel: relief, confusion, disbelief. She had come so far in trying to let go of him, trying to understand the dream for what it was. And yet, here he was, telling her that none of it mattered. "But if you're not real," she said, her voice breaking, "then why do I still feel you? Why does it still hurt?" Liam stepped closer to her, his presence calming, yet filled with a quiet sorrow. "Because the heart doesn't know the difference between what is real and what is imagined. It only knows what it feels. And I've always been real to you, haven't I?" Emilia closed her eyes, the tears threatening to spill over. She hadn't realized how deeply she had held on to him, how much she had wanted him to be real, to be something she could reach out and touch. But perhaps that was the point. Perhaps the love she had for him didn't need to be bound by the rules of reality. Perhaps it was enough to carry him with her, not as a dream, but as a piece of her heart, forever. "I don't know if I can ever let go of you," she whispered, her voice fragile, as though the words themselves might shatter the fragile peace she had built. Liam's expression softened, and he reached out to gently touch her cheek. His fingers were cool, like the breeze itself. "You don't have to let go of me, Emilia. You never have to forget. Just remember the love, the joy, the moments we shared, and carry them with you as a part of who you are. But don't let it keep you from living your life, from finding your own happiness. You've always been enough." Emilia's breath caught in her throat as she looked into his eyes, her heart aching with the depth of his words. She realized, then, that maybe it wasn't about trying to hold on to the dream or forget it altogether. It was about accepting that the love she had felt for him, no matter how unreal it seemed, had shaped her. It had opened her heart in ways she couldn't fully explain. And now, it was time to allow herself to move forward, to let that love be a part of her without drowning in it. "I will," she said softly, a quiet resolve settling over her. "I will carry you with me, Liam, but I will live my life. I will find my own happiness." Liam's smile deepened, and he stepped back, his form beginning to fade like mist in the morning sun. "That's all I've ever wanted for you." As he disappeared completely, Emilia stood there for a long time, staring out over the lake. The wind whispered through the trees, and the song that had always followed her played softly in the distance. And in her heart, she knew that Liam was still there, not as a ghost, but as a memory, a piece of her past that would never be lost. But now, she was ready to live for herself, and that, in the end, was enough. Chapter 14. Between yesterday and tomorrow. The days that followed Emilia's meeting with Liam in the park were strangely peaceful, though a sense of something profound lingered in the air. There was a quiet weight to her existence, a reminder that something had shifted within her. Liam, the dream, and the love they had shared had woven themselves into her heart, but they no longer dictated the course of her life. She had accepted the past, let it rest in its place, and moved forward, albeit uncertainly, into a future that was hers to shape. The mornings were brighter, the evenings a little warmer, and Emilia found herself waking each day with the lightness of knowing that she had allowed herself the space to live again. She had spent so long looking for something she couldn't touch, something she couldn't fully possess, that she had almost forgotten how to appreciate the world around her. But now, every moment seemed filled with possibility. It was a Saturday when Emilia stood in front of the mirror in her small apartment, brushing her hair with steady, practiced motions. She hadn't planned for this day to be anything special, but there was a quiet hum in the air, a feeling that she couldn't shake. She had decided, almost impulsively, that today she would leave the apartment, step out into the world in a way she hadn't allowed herself to do in a long time. It had been too easy to stay in the familiar confines of her home, to let the quiet linger around her like a comfort. But today, she needed to do something different. She dressed quickly, pulling on a simple sundress and a pair of sandals, her fingers lingering on the edge of a necklace Liam had given her in the dream. A silver pendant shaped like a star. She hadn't worn it since that day, but something told her that today was the right time. She placed it around her neck, the cool metal against her skin, and with a final glance in the mirror, stepped out into the warm afternoon. The city was alive with the energy of a Saturday afternoon, and Emilia found herself drifting through the crowds with a sense of calm she hadn't known she was capable of. She passed by street vendors, the scent of freshly baked bread and flowers filling the air, and the sound of laughter and conversation flowing around her like a river. It was also normal, but to her, it felt like an entirely new experience, as though she were seeing the world for the first time. She wasn't sure where she was headed, but something inside her urged her to keep moving. She walked through the bustling streets, her steps slow but sure, taking in the simple beauty of the world around her. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm golden light across everything it touched. She passed a small cafe, the faint sound of a piano drifting out into the street, and found herself pulled inside, as though it were exactly where she needed to be. The cafe was cozy, filled with the soft murmur of conversation and the clink of coffee cups. Emilia found a seat by the window, taking in the view of the busy street outside. She ordered a coffee, her fingers wrapping around the cup as she gazed out at the world, feeling oddly content in her solitude. As she sipped the coffee, her thoughts wandered back to Liam, as they often did. She couldn't seem to stop thinking about him, but it wasn't the same as before. It wasn't a burning need to understand or a desire to bring him back. It was more like a quiet acknowledgement that he had been a part of her life, a part of her heart, and that was enough. She didn't need him to be here, not in the physical sense. He had given her a gift that she would carry with her forever. The understanding that love, even if it's fleeting, is worth experiencing. Even if it's just a dream, even if it's just a memory, it's still real in the way it shapes who we are. As she sat there, a sudden noise from the door drew her attention. A man entered the cafe, his presence somehow familiar, though she couldn't place him at first. He scanned the room briefly before his eyes landed on her. A flash of recognition flickered in his gaze, and before Emilia could even process it, he was walking toward her. Emilia? Her heart skipped a beat, the sound of her name coming from his lips like a wave crashing on the shore. She blinked, unsure of what to say. But when she saw his face clearly, the fog of confusion lifted, and she realized who he was. "Tom?" she asked, her voice a little unsure. Tom had been a friend from her university days, someone she hadn't seen in years. He had been one of the people she had shared moments with when she was younger, someone who had slipped quietly out of her life without any particular reason. They had shared some classes, some laughter, but it had all been so distant. A smile spread across his face as he approached. "I can't believe it's you. I was just passing by, and I thought I saw someone who looked familiar. Mind if I join you?" Emilia hesitated for a moment, surprised by the unexpected reunion, but something about the way he looked at her, the warmth in his smile, made her feel at ease. "Of course, sit down." Tom pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, his eyes studying her with a hint of curiosity. "How have you been?" "It's been, 5 years?" "Something like that," Emilia said with a chuckle, feeling a strange sense of nostalgia for the person she had been back then. It had been a simpler time, before the world had gotten so complicated, before the dreams and the heartache had taken root. They talked for hours, reminiscing about the old days, laughing about the awkward moments of their youth, and catching up on each other's lives. Emilia found herself smiling, really smiling, for the first time in what felt like ages. There was a lightness to their conversation, a warmth that she hadn't realized she had been missing. It wasn't that Tom was a replacement for Liam. Nothing could be that, but it was a reminder that there were other connections in the world, other ways to feel understood, to feel seen. As the afternoon turned into evening, and the cafe grew quieter, Emilia realized that something had shifted in her. She wasn't waiting anymore. She wasn't searching for something that wasn't there. She was learning how to embrace the present, how to appreciate the connections she still had, and how to build new ones. Tom walked her home that evening, and as they stood on her doorstep, he paused, a thoughtful look on his face. "You know," he said, "I've always liked you, Emilia. I think we'd get along really well, if you'd ever want to catch up again sometime." Emilia smiled, her heart light. "I'd like that." As she closed the door behind her, the quiet of the evening settling in, Emilia realized that the world was full of possibilities. She had let go of the past, and in doing so, She had opened herself up to the future that was waiting for her, right here, right now. And as she stood there, looking out of her window, the city lights twinkling below, Emilia felt a peacefulness she hadn't known she was capable of, a quiet acceptance that she was ready to live fully, without the weight of the past holding her back. She had loved, she had dreamed, and now she was ready to live. The ghost of forgotten summers was no longer a shadow over her life. It had become a part of her, and now she was free to move forward into the next chapter, whatever it might bring. Chapter 15. The Haunting of a Heart That Won't Forget. The days were growing shorter now, the crisp air of autumn settling in like a soft blanket, replacing the warmth of summer with its cool embrace. Emilia had gotten used to the rhythm of change, to the ebb and flow of life moving forward. The memories of Liam were still there, lingering in the quiet corners of her heart, but they no longer held the same weight. The ache had dulled, not forgotten but softened, like an old wound that had healed over with time. Emilia was learning what it meant to live in the present, to embrace the fleeting moments that made up each day. It had been a few weeks since her reunion with Tom, and though their friendship was still in its early stages, something about it felt different. There was a warmth in the way he looked at her, a familiarity that she hadn't expected but had grown to appreciate. Yet, despite their growing connection, Emilia still found herself thinking of Liam, of the summer that was only a dream. The dream that had once consumed her had now settled into a comfortable memory, a part of her that no longer dictated her actions but still shaped the way she viewed the world. One crisp afternoon, Emilia found herself at the small cafe again, sitting by the window with a steaming cup of tea in her hands. The street outside was bathed in the golden light of late afternoon, the leaves beginning to turn shades of amber and gold, as if the world itself was slowly falling asleep, preparing for the winter that would inevitably come. She didn't mind the changes. In fact, she welcomed them. The transition from one season to another felt symbolic, a reflection of her own transformation. She had been busy, balancing her work with small moments of exploration, learning to savor the quiet joys of everyday life. It wasn't a grand adventure, but it was hers, and it was enough. As she sipped her tea, her eyes wandered to the door of the cafe, and just as she had been thinking of the passing of time, the door opened with a soft chime. A figure stepped inside, their presence immediately familiar. It was Tom, his hands shoved into the pockets of his jacket, his smile warm and easy as he scanned the room. Emilia's heart fluttered slightly at the sight of him, a sensation that had become all too familiar when he was around. They had spent time together over the past few weeks, dinners, walks, late-night talks, and each moment seemed to draw them closer, though neither had yet spoken the words that might define what they were becoming. But today, as Tom walked toward her, something in the air shifted. Emilia could feel the subtle change in herself, a stirring she hadn't anticipated. "Mind if I join you?" Tom asked, his voice light, but his gaze holding a deeper question. It was as though he, too, felt the delicate shift between them, the way something unspoken hung in the air. "Not at all," Emilia replied, motioning to the empty seat across from her. Her heart was still beating steadily, but now there was a tension to the moment that hadn't been there before. She hadn't expected things to feel so different, so charged, but as he sat down, the space between them felt both wide and intimate. Tom leaned back in his chair, his gaze studying her for a moment before he spoke again, his tone serious yet soft. "I've been thinking a lot about us, Emilia, about how we've reconnected, how easy it is to be around you." Emilia's breath caught slightly in her throat. She hadn't expected this conversation to happen today, hadn't expected to feel the weight of his words so deeply. She looked at him, searching his face for any sign of hesitation, but all she saw was sincerity. "I think about that too," she said, her voice soft, almost unsure. I like spending time with you, Tom. You make me feel normal, like I'm not carrying this weight of the past around all the time. Tom smiled, but there was something bittersweet in his expression. I know what you mean. I've never been able to forget about you, Emilia. Even when we drifted apart all those years ago, there was always this feeling of unfinished business. Emilia's pulse quickened. It was as if he had reached into her heart and voiced the very thing she had been too afraid to admit. There had been a connection between them all those years ago, something that had never been fully explored, and now, as she sat across from him, it felt like that connection was slowly reawakening. I never thought about it like that, she said quietly, her gaze dropping to her tea as if she were searching for the right words. I never really allowed myself to. I was always so lost in other things. Her voice faltered as the memories of Liam flashed before her eyes. The dream, the love, the loss. It was still there, but it no longer consumed her. Tom reached across the table, his hand brushing hers gently. The touch was warm, grounding, and Emilia felt the smallest of sparks in the quiet connection between them. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let herself stay, feeling the sensation of his hand against hers as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Maybe it's time to stop living in the past, Tom said softly, his eyes holding hers with quiet intensity. Maybe it's time to see what happens when we really start living in the present, together. Emilia's breath caught in her chest, and for a moment, the world outside the cafe blurred, as if time itself had paused. She could hear the distant hum of the city, the clinking of coffee cups, but all of it seemed so far away. It was just her and Tom, and the space between them felt both fragile and full of promise. I don't know if I'm ready for that, Emilia whispered, her voice trembling slightly. She wanted to reach out, to take his hand fully, to let herself fall into the possibility of something new. But the remnants of the dream still lingered, still held her in their delicate grasp. You don't have to be ready right now, Tom replied gently, his voice steady and patient. We'll take it slow, one step at a time. No pressure. I'm just here, Emilia. Whenever you're ready. For a long moment, Emilia sat there, her hand still resting in his, her heart pounding softly in her chest. She wasn't sure what the future held, wasn't sure if she was ready to let go of the past in the way Tom was asking of her. But she was beginning to understand something that had eluded her for so long. Love, in any form, was not something she had to force, something she had to search for. It was something that would unfold naturally if she allowed herself to be open to it. And as she looked into Tom's eyes, there was a quiet understanding between them. She didn't need to have everything figured out. Not right now. Not today. But she was ready to take that first step forward. Emilia smiled, a soft, genuine smile that reached her eyes. Okay, one step at a time. Tom smiled back, his hand still gently holding hers, and for the first time in a long time, Emilia felt a sense of hope blossoming inside her. There was still room for love in her life, even after everything that had come before. She didn't need to forget the past to embrace the present. She didn't need to let go of the dream to live in the now. As the golden light of the afternoon faded into evening, and the cafe grew quieter, Emilia realized that she was no longer chasing something that wasn't real. She was embracing what was right in front of her. And for the first time, it felt like the beginning of something new. The echo of summer still whispered in her heart, but it was no longer a ghost. It was a memory, a part of her that had shaped her, but that no longer defined her. And now, she was ready for the next chapter. Chapter 16. A choice between two worlds. The leaves had begun to fall in earnest now, coating the sidewalks in brilliant shades of orange and gold. Emilia had always loved autumn, the way the world seemed to pause in preparation for the winter ahead. There was something about the crisp air, and the scent of earth that made her feel alive in a way she hadn't quite realized was missing. It was as if the season itself mirrored the changes happening within her. She and Tom had spent more time together since their quiet conversation at the cafe. Their connection had deepened in small but significant ways. They shared late-night phone calls, slow walks through the park, and quiet moments where they simply sat together, enjoying the company of one another. Though they had yet to define what they were, the relationship had blossomed in a way that felt right, easy, without pressure, without the weight of expectations. But even as she found herself slowly opening to him, Emilia couldn't quite shake the feeling that there was something beneath the surface of her heart that she hadn't fully explored. She felt lighter, freer in many ways, but there was still a part of her that carried the echoes of her past, the ghost of Liam's memory that would always be a part of her. It wasn't something she wanted to push away, but neither did she want it to hold her back. It was one afternoon, as she walked through the park with Tom, that she found herself in a familiar place. The spot by the lake where she had sat with Liam, where their conversation had turned from playful banter to something deeper. A part of her hadn't realized just how much she had missed this place, the serenity of the water, the rustle of the leaves in the trees. The park had always been a refuge for her, a place where she could think, reflect, and feel the weight of the world fall away. Tom had been telling her about a new project at work, his voice light and animated as they strolled along the path. But Emilia's mind wandered. Her gaze drifted toward the lake, and she found herself wondering if Liam's memory was always going to linger in the quiet corners of her life. "Hey, I'll be right back," she said to Tom, her voice a little distracted. "I just want to sit for a minute." Tom nodded, his face understanding as she walked toward the bench by the water. He knew about her past, about the dream of Liam that had shaped her heart, but he never pushed. He always let her take the space she needed. Emilia sat down on the familiar bench, the cool breeze brushing her face, and stared out at the rippling water. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sounds of the park wash over her. The laughter of children, the chirping of birds, the faint hum of the city beyond the trees. For a moment, she allowed herself to simply be. The memories of that summer with Liam flooded her mind, as they often did. She remembered his laughter, the way his eyes had sparkled in the sunlight, the warmth of his touch. She remembered the way he had kissed her beneath the stars, as if the universe had been in on the secret of their love. And she remembered the heartbreak of waking up to a world that had lost him, a world that had never truly held him in the first place. She felt the familiar ache in her chest, a longing for something she couldn't quite reach. But it was no longer a painful yearning. It was simply a part of her, a reminder of the beauty and fragility of love. Emilia took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill her lungs, and when she opened her eyes, she saw something that made her heart skip a beat. Across the lake, standing at the edge of the path, was a man. His silhouette was familiar, though she couldn't quite place it at first. He was tall, with dark hair and a posture that seemed to radiate both strength and sorrow. Her heart thudded in her chest as she studied him, the realization dawning slowly, almost unwillingly. It was Liam. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a long moment she simply stared, unsure if what she was seeing was real. He stood there, staring out at the lake, his back to her, as if he, too, were waiting for something. The world around her seemed to fade, and for a brief, breathtaking moment, it felt as though the years of grief and longing had been erased, as though the dream she had once believed was just that, a dream, had somehow come alive. But then, as quickly as it had appeared, the vision of him faded. The man across the lake turned away and disappeared into the trees, leaving nothing but the empty space where he had stood. Emilia blinked, her pulse racing. Was it real? Was it him? She wasn't sure anymore. She sat there for a long time, the echoes of that brief encounter ringing in her ears. She thought she had let go of him, thought she had moved forward, but the vision of Liam, the way he had looked as though he were standing there waiting for her, made her question everything she thought she knew about herself and the world around her. Tom had quietly joined her, sitting beside her without a word. He hadn't asked what she was thinking, hadn't tried to push her to speak. He simply sat, his presence grounding, offering her the space to sort through the swirl of emotions she was feeling. "You okay?" he asked after a long silence, his voice gentle, filled with understanding. Emilia nodded, though her thoughts were still tangled. "I thought I saw someone." "Who?" Tom asked, his brow furrowing slightly in concern. "A man. I thought it was someone I used to know. Someone I loved." Tom didn't press her further, but there was a softness in his eyes, a quiet empathy. "I know what it's like to see ghosts from the past," he said after a moment. "They have a way of showing up when you least expect it." Emilia looked at him then, truly looked at him, and for the first time, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. Tom wasn't trying to take Liam's place, wasn't asking her to forget the past. He was simply here, with her, in the present, offering her the room to explore what her heart truly wanted. "I think I've been holding on to something that isn't real," Emilia said slowly, her voice quiet, as if she were speaking to herself more than to Tom. "Maybe I've been living in the past for too long, clinging to a memory of something that was never really mine." Tom's hand found hers, his fingers curling around hers in a steady, comforting grip. "You don't have to let go of the past all at once," he said softly. "You don't have to forget. But it's okay to let the past exist beside you, without letting it control you. You can have both, your memories and your present. You don't have to choose." Emilia closed her eyes, the weight of his words settling over her like a blanket. She didn't have to choose. She could carry the memory of Liam with her, let it live in the quiet spaces of her heart, but she didn't have to live in it. She didn't have to wait for something that wasn't meant to be. And as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the lake, Emilia realized that she was ready to stop searching for something that didn't exist anymore. The ghosts of her past, of Liam and of that fleeting love, would always be a part of her. But it was time to embrace the living world, to find a way to live fully in the present, and to allow herself to be open to the future. The world around her was full of possibility, and for the first time, she was ready to step into it. She squeezed Tom's hand, offering him a small but genuine smile. "Thank you," she whispered. He smiled back, his eyes warm and steady. "Anytime." As they stood together, side by side, Emilia felt a quiet peace settle within her. She didn't have all the answers. She didn't know where life was taking her. But for the first time in a long time, she was ready to find out. And for the first time in a long time, she felt the echo of summer, of love, of loss, and of life, slowly fade into the background, leaving room for something new to begin. Chapter 17. Letting Go of Forever. The days passed by in a blur of shifting colors and gentle winds, as autumn seemed to dissolve into winter without much fanfare. Emilia found herself caught in a quiet rhythm of life, waking up, going to work, spending time with Tom, and occasionally visiting the park where memories of Liam still clung to the air. But the weight of those memories had shifted, no longer pressing down on her with the intensity they once did. Instead, they had become something she carried with a quiet grace, something that was a part of her but no longer defined her. The world outside had changed, the once vibrant green trees now bare, their skeletal branches etched against a pale sky. The air had grown colder, and the streets were dusted with the first hint of snow. Yet, despite the changing season, Emilia felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the weather. It was a warmth that had bloomed slowly over the past weeks, a warmth that was tied to Tom. She had never imagined that she could find someone who could so easily fill the spaces in her life that had once been occupied by dreams, by the memories of a love that had never fully existed. But with Tom, things felt real. He was here, in the present, with her, and for the first time in a long time, Emilia felt like she was truly living. They spent a Sunday afternoon together in the city, walking through the quiet streets, their footsteps crunching on the frost-covered pavement. Tom had suggested they take a trip to the bookstore she loved so much, a place that always felt like a sanctuary to her. Emilia had agreed, though her heart wasn't entirely in it. She had come to a realization recently, something that had taken her by surprise. The books, the stories that once transported her to other worlds, no longer held the same magic for her. It was as if she had lived so deeply in the dream of Liam that everything else had begun to pale in comparison. "Hey," Tom said, breaking her reverie as they entered the warm, dimly lit bookstore. "Let's go grab some coffee afterward. I know a little cafe nearby that's perfect for this weather." Emilia smiled at the suggestion, though her mind felt elsewhere. "Sure, that sounds nice." They walked through the aisles of books, their footsteps echoing softly in the quiet space. It was familiar, comforting, but Emilia couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. She found herself idly running her fingers along the spines of the books, not really seeing them. It wasn't that she didn't love the bookstore, but there was a subtle shift in her now, a pull toward something that wasn't wrapped up in pages or memories. Tom, as always, seemed to sense when she was lost in thought. He leaned against a nearby shelf and watched her, a thoughtful expression on his face. "You okay?" he asked, his voice light but with an undertone of concern. Emilia nodded, though she felt an unfamiliar knot tighten in her chest. She was okay. Of course she was. But the truth, the real truth, was that she wasn't entirely sure who she was anymore. She had spent so long living in the dream of a summer that had never existed that it was as though she had forgotten how to live outside of it. I think I'm just realizing that I've been living in the past for too long," she admitted, her voice quieter than usual. She looked down at the book in her hand, not really reading the title. "I've been holding on to a memory of something that was never really mine. And now, I'm not sure how to let it go." Tom's gaze softened, and he took a step closer, his presence reassuring. "You don't have to let go all at once, Emilia. And you don't have to forget what you had with Liam. I think you just need to learn how to carry it with you, without letting it stop you from moving forward." Emilia swallowed, a lump forming in her throat. It was as though he had unlocked something within her, something she hadn't fully understood until now. She had been so afraid of moving on, afraid that in doing so, she would lose everything that had made that summer with Liam feel real. But what if moving on didn't mean losing it? What if it just meant finding a new way to be with it? "I don't want to forget him," Emilia whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "But I don't know how to make room for everything else." Tom reached out and took her hand, gently threading his fingers through hers. "I think it's about finding balance," he said softly. "You can still remember him, still love him in your own way, but you don't have to let that memory define you. You're allowed to love again, Emilia. You're allowed to feel things for someone else." Emilia looked up at him, her heart pounding in her chest. The warmth of his touch, the sincerity in his eyes. It was everything she had needed but had never fully allowed herself to accept. She had been afraid for so long, afraid that letting go of the past meant she was betraying it, that loving again meant forgetting. But as she stood there in the quiet bookstore, with Tom beside her, she realized that love didn't have to be finite. There was room for both, room for the memories of the past and the possibilities of the future. She didn't have to choose one over the other. She could carry them both, side by side, and still be whole. "I think I'm ready," she said, her voice steady now, though there was a flicker of uncertainty. "I think I'm ready to see what's next." Tom smiled, a slow, warm smile that lit up his entire face. "I'm here," he said softly, his thumb brushing gently over her knuckles. "Whenever you're ready." And for the first time in a long time, Emilia believed him. She believed that she could move forward without losing the love she had once known. She didn't have to leave Liam behind, but she could allow herself to find new things to love, new things to hold on to. The bell above the bookstore door jingled as someone entered, but for Emilia, the world outside seemed to pause. In that quiet moment, everything felt like it was exactly where it was supposed to be. The snow outside had begun to fall more heavily now, coating the city in a soft, white blanket. Emilia and Tom made their way out of the bookstore, the cold air biting at their cheeks as they walked side by side down the street. There was still a lingering sense of uncertainty, but there was also something new, something that had begun to bloom in the spaces she had once kept closed. They didn't speak much as they walked, but the silence between them felt comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. As they reached the cafe Tom had mentioned, he opened the door for her, his hand gently at her back as she stepped inside. It was small and cozy, the scent of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. The warmth inside was a welcome relief from the cold outside, and as they found a seat by the window, Emilia realized that, for the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. She didn't have all the answers. She didn't know what the future held or what shape her love would take, but she was no longer afraid to find out. And as the snow fell softly outside, Emilia allowed herself to take a deep breath, to finally let go of the ghosts that had held her captive for so long. There was a world beyond the past. There were new memories to be made, and she was ready for them. Chapter 18. The Summer That Never Faded. The world outside had transformed once more. The snow had settled into a soft blanket, dusting the streets and rooftops in shades of white and gray. Emilia had always found winter to be a season of reflection, when the world slowed down, when everything seemed quieter, more introspective. It was as though nature itself was taking a breath before the renewal of spring. But for Emilia, this winter felt different. It wasn't the solitude she had known before, nor the quiet ache of a past love. It was something more, a sense of peace, a calmness that settled deep within her, like the slow, steady rhythm of a heartbeat. She had allowed herself to accept the passage of time, to embrace the changes that had come with it. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt ready to move forward. Tom had become a steady presence in her life, his warmth and kindness drawing her closer each day. They had been spending more time together, often in simple, quiet moments, cooking meals at home, taking long walks through the snow, and talking about everything and nothing. It was easy with him, in a way she had never imagined. There were no grand declarations, no pressure. It was just the two of them, finding their way in the present. But even as she found herself more and more at ease with Tom, Emilia still carried the memory of Liam with her, tucked carefully inside her heart. It no longer felt like a burden. It wasn't something she tried to suppress, but something she had learned to live with, to honor without letting it overshadow her life. She had come to understand that the love she had for Liam, however brief, however fleeting, was a part of her. And in a strange way, it made her more open, more capable of loving again. One cold evening, as Emilia and Tom sat on the couch together in her apartment, the soft hum of the heating system the only sound in the room, Tom turned to her with a thoughtful expression. His dark eyes were steady, his brow furrowed slightly as though he were weighing his words. "Emilia," he began, his voice gentle, "I've been thinking about something." She looked at him, her heart skipping a beat at the seriousness in his tone. "What's on your mind?" "I've been wondering if you're ready to take the next step," Tom said, his words measured but sincere. I know we've been taking things slow, and I don't want to rush you, but I think we both know there's something real here. Something that could grow into something more." Emilia's chest tightened, her breath catching in her throat. She hadn't expected this conversation tonight, but now that it was here, she realized just how much she had been wondering the same thing. She had been afraid to think about the future too much, afraid to allow herself to hope for something more. But in the quiet moments they shared, in the simple way Tom made her feel seen and understood, she realized that maybe it was time to let herself be vulnerable again. "I think I am," she whispered, her voice soft but steady. "I think I'm ready." Tom smiled then, his relief palpable, and his hand found hers, warm and steady in her grasp. They sat there for a moment, in the comfortable silence that had come to define their time together, both of them processing the weight of the moment. And yet, even as Emilia felt a sense of certainty about what was unfolding between her and Tom, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was stirring deep within her. It was a quiet, persistent tug in the back of her mind, a feeling that something was coming, something she couldn't quite place. The next day, after a morning spent bundled up in scarves and coats against the cold, Emilia found herself wandering through the city streets. She had no particular destination in mind, just a need to breathe, to clear her thoughts. The snow had begun to fall again, dusting the world in soft, swirling flakes that seemed to blur the line between earth and sky. She ended up, almost without realizing it, at the park, at the lake where she had once sat with Liam, the bench by the water. The spot where they had shared so many quiet moments was empty now, as it always was. The world around her seemed peaceful, suspended in the hush of winter. And yet, there was a restlessness within her, something that pulled her toward the edge of the lake, as though the water held the answers she had been seeking. As she walked along the frozen path, the snow crunching beneath her boots, Emilia felt the familiar tug of memories. She thought of Liam, his laughter, the way he had held her close on that last night, the ache of waking up and finding herself in a world without him. And yet, as the memory surfaced, it no longer felt sharp, no longer felt like a wound. It was just a part of her, like the seasons themselves. She could honor it without letting it define her. She reached the edge of the lake, her gaze drawn to the frozen expanse of ice. The world seemed so still, so silent, as if the entire universe was holding its breath. Emilia felt a sense of peace wash over her, a clarity that she hadn't known in years. She realized then that she had come full circle. She wasn't the same person who had wandered through the world in search of something she had never been able to name. She wasn't the same person who had lost herself in a dream of a summer love. She was someone new now, someone who had learned to carry the past with her without letting it weigh her down. Someone who had learned to love again, without fear of losing herself in the process. She wasn't searching anymore. She had found her place, her balance. And just as the thought crossed her mind, she felt a shift, something subtle, something almost imperceptible in the air around her. She turned, her heart racing in her chest, as if her body recognized something her mind hadn't fully grasped yet. And there, standing at the edge of the path, was someone she had never expected to see again. Liam. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The world around her faded into the background, and all that remained was the sight of him. He stood there, not quite looking at her, but she could feel his presence, as palpable as the chill in the air. The sight of him, of the boy who had once been her everything, struck her with the force of a storm. She felt the weight of the years between them, the weight of the love that had never truly been. And yet, as she stood there, she realized something else, something even more important. She wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't afraid of the past, of the ghosts that had haunted her for so long. She had made her peace with them, with the love she had lost and the love she had found again. With a deep breath, Emilia turned away from him, her heart steady, her steps sure. She didn't need to face him to know that she had finally let him go. She walked back down the path, her pace slow but resolute. The world was still waiting for her, still full of promise. And with each step she took, she knew she was ready to embrace whatever came next. Because for the first time in a long time, she understood something profound. That love, like seasons, was always changing, always moving forward. And she was ready to move with it.